It was 4:03 in the morning when my phone rang, not a polite ring, not the quiet kind that waits patiently. No, this one kept vibrating across my nightstand like something urgent was wrong. When I saw the name on the screen, my stomach tightened. Ryan, my son. And when your child calls at 4 in the morning, there are only two possibilities. Either something terrible has happened or something very expensive has happened. I answered the call, still half awake. Before I could even say hello, Ryan's voice exploded through the phone. "Mom, finally, why is your card declining?" I sat up slowly in bed. "My card?" I asked calmly. "Yes, your card," he snapped. "We're at the hotel front desk. The bill is $12,000 and your card got declined. I need you to fix it right now." $12,000 at 4 in the morning. I didn't interrupt him. I simply listened. "Mom, you need to send the payment immediately," he continued impatiently. "The manager is standing right here. Lauren is embarrassed. Just transfer the money now." I listened. I looked at the clock, then I said one word. "No," and I hung up. The silence in my bedroom afterward was almost peaceful. But what happened the next morning was something my son never saw coming. Before I continue, if stories about family, truth, and quiet strength speak to you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'm always curious where listeners are watching from. Let me know your city in the comments. Now let me tell you how a 4 a.m. phone call revealed something about my son that took me nearly 40 years to understand. My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 68 years old. For most of my life, I worked as a corporate risk auditor, which is a polite way of saying I spent decades studying how people behave when money is involved. Companies hired me when something didn't make sense, when numbers didn't match, when someone inside the system was quietly taking advantage of something they weren't supposed to. My job was simple: follow the patterns and wait, because eventually every pattern reveals the truth. It's a skill that served me very well in business. And eventually, it saved me and my own family. I live in a modest 2-story brick house at the end of Willow Creek Drive. Nothing fancy, white shutters. A small vegetable garden in the backyard. My neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy Lane, who is 72 and still sharp as a tack, likes to say my house is the quietest one on the street. "You live like a retired librarian," she once told me. I suppose that's true. Most people assume that means I don't have much money. I never correct them. Quiet living confuses people who measure success by noise. My son Ryan Parker grew up in this house. He's 39 now. Tall, charming, the kind of man who can walk into a room and make everyone feel like they've known him for years. Ryan works in luxury event management, organizing high-end weddings and corporate galas. He understands champagne brands, designer venues, and guest lists that look like magazine covers. But what Ryan never quite learned was the difference between luxury and stability. Those are two very different things. Ryan married Lauren Parker, my daughter-in-law, 4 years ago. Lauren is 35 and works as what she calls a lifestyle content creator. In simpler language, she posts photographs of expensive things online: designer handbags, beach resorts, restaurants where the plates are small and the bills are not. Her social media followers love it. Her credit cards, not so much. Lauren believes in appearances. She believes life should look impressive. And somewhere along the way, she decided my role in that vision was simple. I was the quiet financial safety net. At least, that's what she thought. The funny thing about being a risk auditor for 35 years is that you develop certain habits. You notice patterns, you notice inconsistencies, and you definitely notice financial behavior. About 8 months ago, I received a phone call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. His name is Marcus Doyle, and he used to work with me at the compliance division of a major investment bank. Marcus now works in financial fraud monitoring, which means he watches transactions that banks flag as unusual. "Evelyn," he said that afternoon, "this is a professional courtesy call. Something came across my desk today connected to an account structure you created years ago." You see, years earlier, I had worked with my attorney Thomas Green, a meticulous estate lawyer I trusted deeply, to design a series of family financial protections. Not because I expected trouble, but because experience had taught me something important: money changes people. Marcus explained that several large transactions connected to those structures had been appearing more frequently. Luxury travel charges, high-end retail purchases, hotel deposits, At first, I assumed there had been some misunderstanding, but patterns don't lie, and the patterns pointed somewhere uncomfortable. They pointed directly at Ryan and Lauren. Now here is something important to understand. I didn't confront them immediately. A lifetime of investigation teaches patience. When people think no one is watching, they eventually reveal everything themselves. And that's exactly what happened. Because 3 weeks before that 4 a.m. phone call, Marcus called again. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "there's a reservation that just hit the system." "What kind of reservation?" I asked. "A luxury hotel. 3 nights, presidential suite." I waited. He continued. "The projected total is about $12,000. 12,000. Even then, I didn't react. Instead, I simply asked one question. "Did the authorization go through?" Marcus paused. "No," he said slowly. "It didn't." I remember looking out my kitchen window at the garden when he said that. The roses were blooming that week, bright red. Richard, my late husband, used to plant roses every spring. I stood there quietly and said, "Thank you for letting me know." Marcus hesitated. "You're not surprised?" "No," I replied calmly. "I was expecting something like this eventually." And that brings us back to the phone call at 4 in the morning. Ryan shouting, Lauren embarrassed in the hotel lobby, a $12,000 bill, and a card that no longer worked the way they thought it did. When I said no and hung up the phone, I knew something they didn't. Because the problem they were experiencing in that luxury hotel lobby was not an accident. It was the result of a system that had quietly activated exactly the way it was designed to. A system my lawyer Thomas Green helped me build years earlier. A system that only activates when a certain line is crossed. And my son had just crossed it. What Ryan didn't know that morning was that his phone call wasn't the first one I received about that hotel bill, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Because by sunrise, 3 more people were going to contact me about what happened at that hotel front desk. One of them was the hotel manager herself, and what she told me about Ryan and Lauren's behavior that night changed everything. The sun had barely risen when my phone rang again. Not Ryan this time. The number on the screen belonged to an area code I recognized immediately. It was the city where the luxury hotel was located. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. One habit I learned during 35 years as a corporate risk auditor is this: never rush when the truth is about to arrive. "Evelyn Parker speaking?" The woman on the other end spoke with the polished calm of someone who deals with wealthy people every day. "Good morning, Mrs. Parker. My name is Claudia Alvarez, and I'm the general manager of the Grand Meridian Hotel." Ah, the hotel manager herself. That was faster than I expected. "How can I help you, Miss Alvarez?" I asked. There was a brief pause, the kind people take when they're choosing their words carefully. "I'm calling regarding your son, Ryan Parker, and his wife, Lauren Parker. They checked into our presidential suite 3 nights ago. We were told your financial authorization would cover their stay." I smiled faintly to myself. "Yes," I said, "I believe they expected that." The woman cleared her throat. "Well, the authorization we had on file was declined this morning when the final charges were processed." "I'm aware," I replied calmly. "My son called me about it around 4 this morning." There was another pause, longer this time. "Mrs. Parker," she said carefully, "I felt it was important to contact you directly because there was some confusion at the front desk." Confusion. That was a polite word. "Please go on," I said. I leaned back in my kitchen chair and looked out the window toward the rose garden. The early sunlight was beginning to touch the petals. "When the card was declined," Claudia continued, "Mr. Parker insisted it must be a banking error. He said his mother was extremely wealthy and that the hotel would regret embarrassing him in front of other guests." I didn't respond. Years of auditing taught me something important. When people begin explaining behavior, the story usually gets worse before it gets better. Claudia continued. "Your daughter-in-law also insisted we should simply charge the card again because, and I quote, Evelyn always pays." I let out a quiet breath. That sentence told me more than the entire hotel bill. "Did they eventually settle the account?" I asked. "Not yet," she replied. "They're currently still in the suite. They said they're waiting for the payment transfer from you." I glanced at the clock. It was 7:14 in the morning. "And you called me because—" Claudia hesitated before answering. "Because during the discussion at the front desk, your son mentioned something unusual." Now my attention sharpened. What did he say? He told our staff the credit authorization was connected to a family trust account you manage. My fingers rested quietly on the kitchen table. Interesting. And, I asked gently, he said he has access to it? I almost laughed, not out loud, of course, but inside the irony was almost beautiful. Access. That word had caused more corporate scandals than I could count during my career. Access is what people think they have right before they discover they don't. Mrs. Parker, Claudia continued carefully, I'm not calling to interfere in a family matter. But our hotel policy requires clarity when a guest claims financial backing from a third party. We simply wanted to confirm whether you intended to settle the balance. I took another slow sip of coffee. No, I said simply. Silence filled the line for a moment. Understood, she replied professionally. In that case, we will proceed according to our normal billing procedures. Which means, I asked, they will need to provide an alternative payment method or vacate the suite today. I thanked her politely and ended the call. Then I sat there for several minutes, quietly thinking. One of the most interesting things about watching a financial system unfold is seeing exactly where the pressure begins to crack it. Ryan thought the solution was simple: call mom, demand money, problem solved. But what Ryan didn't understand was something I had spent decades teaching corporations. Systems reveal character. The moment pressure appears, people show exactly who they are. And that 4 a.m. phone call had already revealed more about my son than he probably realized. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message. Ryan, Mom, call me immediately. This is ridiculous. A second message followed 30 seconds later. The hotel is threatening to call security. Then another. Lauren is furious. I set the phone down without answering, not because I was angry. Not even because I wanted to punish him. No, I was waiting, because the system I had built years ago was still in motion, and the next piece of information I needed wasn't coming from Ryan. It was coming from someone who understood the financial structure behind that declined card far better than my son ever had. Right on cue, my phone rang again. This time the caller ID read Marcus Doyle. I answered. Good morning, Marcus. He didn't waste time. Evelyn, I see the alert triggered. Yes, I said calmly. It seems my son discovered the boundary this morning. Marcus exhaled slowly. You designed that safeguard 15 years ago. I always wondered if it would ever activate. People eventually reveal themselves, I said. It's only a matter of time. Marcus lowered his voice slightly. There's something else you should know. Now that caught my attention. Go on. The system didn't just freeze the hotel authorization, he said. It flagged several other transactions connected to Ryan and Lauren over the past 6 months. I felt my stomach tighten slightly. How many? Marcus hesitated. Enough that the compliance department opened a monitoring file. I stared out at the roses again. The morning sun had fully reached the garden now. Marcus, I asked quietly, how much are we talking about? There was a long pause on the line, then he answered. Evelyn, the total is approaching $200,000. I closed my eyes for a moment. 200,000. My son hadn't just been living beyond his means. He'd been quietly draining something he never truly understood. The system had finally stopped him. But what Marcus said next made the situation far more serious than I expected. And Evelyn, he added carefully, your lawyer Thomas Green is going to need to see this immediately. Why? I asked. Marcus sighed. Because what Ryan and Lauren did might not just be irresponsible. He paused. It might be illegal. And at that moment, I realized something very important about that 4 a.m. phone call. Ryan thought he was waking his mother to demand money. What he had actually done was trigger the beginning of a financial investigation that could destroy everything he thought he owned. And by noon that same day, my lawyer was going to show me something hidden in the trust documents that even I hadn't noticed before. When Marcus Doyle told me the number was approaching $200,000, I didn't panic. Panic is emotional. Panic makes people react too quickly. And during my 35 years as a corporate risk auditor, reacting too quickly was usually the fastest way to miss the real problem. Instead, I did what I had trained myself to do for decades. I started asking questions. Marcus, I said calmly, are those transactions recent? Most of them happened over the past 8 months, he replied. Luxury retail. travel bookings, large hospitality charges, all routed through the discretionary trust account your lawyer created years ago. I closed my eyes for a moment, not because I was surprised, because a pattern was finally becoming clear. You see, when my son Ryan Parker was 25 years old, I did something that most parents probably wouldn't do. I didn't give him money. Instead, I created a financial structure. My lawyer Thomas Green helped me design it. Thomas is 63 now, a careful man who reads contracts the way surgeons read X-rays. Nothing escapes him. 15 years ago, we sat in his office reviewing every detail of what would eventually become my estate plan. But I wasn't planning for death. I was planning for something else entirely: human nature. I had spent my entire career watching executives steal from their own companies. People with six-figure salaries who still couldn't resist taking one extra advantage, one extra benefit, one extra payment they believed no one would notice. And every single time, the pattern was the same. It started small. Then it grew, then eventually it became something impossible to hide. So when Ryan turned 25, I created something Thomas jokingly called a financial mirror. The trust wasn't designed to simply give Ryan money. It was designed to reveal the way he handled it. The structure allowed limited access to certain funds under specific conditions: education support, emergency expenses, temporary financial gaps. The system worked quietly in the background, and for years Ryan rarely touched it. At first, I was proud of him. He worked hard, built a career, paid his own rent. Then about 4 years ago, Lauren entered the picture. Now let me be clear about something. I never disliked my daughter-in-law personally. Lauren Parker is intelligent, polished, and very good at presenting the image she wants people to see. Her social media pages look like travel magazines: 5-star resorts, rooftop restaurants, designer brands displayed carefully in sunlight. The first time she visited my house, she walked into my kitchen and glanced around as if she were evaluating a property listing. "It's very simple," she said politely. I smiled. "Simple can be peaceful." She didn't respond to that. Instead, she asked Ryan quietly, but not quite quietly enough, "Do you think we'll ever renovate this place?" That moment stayed with me longer than she probably realized. Because people reveal themselves in small comments long before they reveal themselves in big decisions. And now here we were, $200,000, slowly pulled from a trust Ryan barely remembered existed. "Marcus," I asked, "how did they access the discretionary side of the account?" "Authorized requests," he said. "Submitted through the digital portal Thomas set up years ago." That was interesting. I sat forward slightly. Ryan never had direct approval rights. Marcus hesitated. "He didn't." "Then how were the requests approved?" There was a pause on the line. Then Marcus said something that made my stomach tighten slightly. "Evelyn, someone submitted them using your authorization credentials." Now that got my full attention. "That's impossible," I said quietly. Marcus spoke carefully. "I know." Which is why the system triggered a secondary audit last night. The room felt very quiet suddenly. Outside, a breeze moved through the roses in the garden. "Marcus," I said slowly, "are you telling me someone attempted to use my credentials?" "Yes." I took a deep breath and leaned back in my chair. The situation had just changed completely. Overspending was one thing, entitlement was another. But impersonating a financial authorization account, that crossed into something much more serious. "I'm meeting with Thomas Green today," I said. "Good," Marcus replied, "because the system flagged something else." "Of course it did, systems always do." "What else?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "One of the requests was submitted from a device registered under Lauren Parker's email account." I didn't speak for a moment, not because I was shocked, because suddenly everything made sense. Ryan might be careless with money, but Ryan was never clever enough to manipulate authorization systems. Lauren, however, built her entire online career around digital platforms and account access. She understood how those systems worked. And she clearly believed something very important. She believed no one was watching. "Marcus," I said finally, "thank you for calling." "Be careful, Evelyn," he replied quietly. "This situation might become more complicated than you expected." After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen for several minutes thinking. Eventually, my phone buzzed again. "Ryan, of course." I glanced at the message preview. "Mom, this is insane." The hotel is threatening to cancel the room and Lauren is humiliated. Fix this now. I set the phone down without replying. The problem with entitlement is that it creates a very predictable reaction. When the money stops, the pressure begins. And pressure reveals the truth faster than anything else in the world. Just then, there was a soft knock at my front door. I opened it to find Mrs. Dorothy Lane, my 72-year-old neighbor, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you were already awake," she said. Dorothy has a way of appearing exactly when the moment requires honesty. We sat together on the porch swing. She looked at me carefully. "You've got that quiet thinking face again," she said. "What happened?" I told her about the 4 a.m. phone call, about the hotel bill, about Marcus, about the $200,000. Dorothy didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, she shook her head slowly. "Evelyn," she said gently, "you spent 40 years protecting everyone else." I looked at her. "That's what mothers do," she nodded. "Yes, but sometimes protecting people is exactly what allows them to keep doing the wrong thing." I didn't respond. Instead, I watched the sunlight move slowly across the lawn. Dorothy took a sip of coffee and added quietly, "At some point, Ryan needs to see the consequences of his choices." She was right. But what neither of us knew yet was that Ryan and Lauren were about to discover something even more serious than a frozen hotel payment. Because at 10:30 that morning, my lawyer Thomas Green was going to open the original trust documents. And hidden in those documents was a clause I had completely forgotten existed. A clause that was about to turn my son's $12,000 hotel bill into a legal investigation. When I sat down in Thomas Green's office at 10:30 that morning, I already suspected the situation was serious. But even after 35 years of investigating financial behavior, I wasn't prepared for what Thomas was about to show me. Thomas is not the type of man who reacts quickly. That's part of what makes him such a good estate attorney. He reads slowly, carefully, the way surgeons move when they're working close to something vital. I placed the folder Marcus had sent me on his desk. Inside were the transaction summaries connected to the family trust he helped me build 15 years earlier. Thomas adjusted his glasses and began reading. For the first few pages, his expression didn't change, but then he leaned forward slightly, then he read the same page again. Finally, he looked up at me. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "tell me you didn't authorize these." "I didn't," I replied. He turned the pages again. Slowly, $200,000 in discretionary withdrawals, he murmured. Luxury travel, retail purchases, hospitality charges. Over the past 8 months. Yes, and these were submitted through the digital authorization portal we created? Yes, Thomas leaned back in his chair, and approved using your credentials. I folded my hands calmly. Apparently, now he looked directly at me. "And you're absolutely certain you didn't approve them?" "Thomas," I said, "I spent 35 years auditing financial risk for corporations worth billions of dollars. I don't accidentally approve $200,000 of discretionary spending." A faint smile crossed his face. "Fair point." Then he became serious again. "You spoke with Marcus Doyle?" "Yes." "He said the system flagged something unusual." Thomas nodded slowly. "I believe I know what triggered the alert." He stood up and walked to one of the tall bookshelves behind his desk. From a locked drawer, he removed a thick binder labeled Parker Family Trust Original Structure. I hadn't seen that binder in years. He placed it on the desk between us. "Do you remember," he asked, "why you asked me to include the behavioral safeguard clause?" I thought for a moment. "Yes," I said, "because I had spent my career watching smart people make terrible decisions once money was involved. 15 years earlier, when Ryan turned 25, I asked Thomas to design a financial structure that would support him if he needed help, but also protect the money if he began abusing the system. At the time, Thomas had joked that I was creating what he called a financial lie detector. The trust allowed controlled access to certain funds, but it also monitored the behavior around those funds. If the pattern of withdrawals suggested misuse, the system automatically escalated the situation. Thomas flipped through several pages of the binder. "Here it is," he said. He turned the document toward me. "Section 14, Behavioral Protection Clause." I leaned forward to read it, and suddenly I remembered why I had insisted on that clause. The language was simple but powerful if the trust system detected. Unauthorized credential use, repeated luxury expenditures outside approved categories, attempts to impersonate the trustee, then the system would trigger an automatic financial freeze and compliance review. I looked up at Thomas. So the system activated? Yes, he said, but that's not the part you forgot. He flipped another page. There's a second section tied to that clause. I frowned slightly. A second section, Thomas nodded. You asked for it specifically? He pointed to the document. Section C, Legal Escalation Procedure. I read the paragraph slowly, and suddenly my stomach tightened because I had completely forgotten this existed. If the behavioral protection clause was triggered by evidence of impersonation or financial manipulation, the trust required the attorney overseeing the structure to conduct a formal review for potential financial fraud. In other words, what Ryan and Lauren had done might not just be irresponsible, it might legally qualify as attempted fraud. Thomas looked at me carefully. Evelyn, if someone used your authorization credentials without permission, yes, that crosses into criminal territory. The room became very quiet. I stared at the document again, because suddenly the situation was no longer about a $12,000 hotel bill or even $200,000 in questionable spending. It was about identity misuse. Thomas spoke carefully. I want to be very clear about something. He folded his hands on the desk. If Lauren Parker submitted financial approvals using your credentials, that is a serious legal issue. I nodded slowly. Marcus had already hinted at this, but hearing it confirmed by my attorney made the situation much more real. Do you want to pursue this? Thomas asked. It was a simple question, but the answer wasn't simple at all. Because Ryan was my son, and whatever mistakes he had made, he was still the boy I raised in that little house on Willow Creek Drive. Thomas watched my face carefully. You don't have to decide anything today, he said. But we do need to gather the facts. What does that involve? I asked. He opened another folder. First, we document every transaction. He slid several papers toward me. These are the records Marcus already sent. But we'll need the original authorization logs. And the hotel charges? Already included. Thomas tapped the folder. But the most important question is this. He looked at me directly. Did Ryan know about this? That question hung in the air for several seconds, and the truth was I didn't know. Ryan had always been careless with money, but impersonating financial authorization systems, that felt different. That felt more deliberate. Marcus mentioned something else, I said slowly. Thomas raised an eyebrow. What? One of the requests was submitted from a device connected to Lauren's email account. Thomas sighed softly. That complicates things. How? Because if she used Ryan's access to reach the trust portal and then used your credentials to approve withdrawals, it creates a legal chain of responsibility. I leaned back in the chair. What does that mean in plain English? Thomas answered calmly. It means someone inside your son's household attempted to manipulate the trust system. And if proven, then technically it becomes financial impersonation and attempted fraud. The words felt heavy in the room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting quietly in my mind all morning. Thomas, if this becomes a legal investigation, what happens to Ryan? Thomas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed the binder slowly. Then he said something that made the entire situation feel much more serious than I expected. Evelyn, if your son was involved in this, the hotel bill will be the smallest problem he faces. I sat very still. Because suddenly I realized something important about that 4 a.m. phone call. Ryan thought he was calling his mother to demand money. But what he had actually done was trigger a legal review of everything he and Lauren had been doing for months. And the next person who was about to contact me was not the bank, not the hotel, not even my lawyer. It was Ryan himself. And judging by the 7 missed calls on my phone, he had just discovered that the financial system he believed he could control was completely out of his hands. When I stepped out of Thomas Green's office, the afternoon sun was already low enough to stretch long shadows across the sidewalk. I paused beside my car and looked at my phone. 7 missed calls, all from Ryan, and 3 text messages. The first read, "Mom, call me now." The second, "This situation is getting out of control." The third was shorter. "They're saying we have to leave the hotel today." I stood there for a moment thinking about the difference between panic and realization. Panic happens when people think a problem will disappear if they shout loudly enough. Realization happens when they finally understand the problem is real. Ryan was still somewhere between the two. I unlocked my car and sat down but didn't start the engine yet. Instead, I called Mrs. Dorothy Lane, my neighbor and longtime friend. Dorothy answered on the second ring. "Well," she said immediately, "judging by the sound of your voice earlier, I'm guessing this situation got worse." "It got clearer," I replied. "That's usually worse." I told her about the meeting with Thomas, about the trust clause, about the impersonated credentials. Dorothy listened quietly. When I finished, she let out a slow breath. "Evelyn," she said gently, "that girl has been spending your money like it was her personal lifestyle fund. It appears that way. And Ryan, I don't know yet." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "You raised that boy," she said carefully. "You know his heart better than anyone." "Yes," I said. "But sometimes," she added softly, "love makes us overlook things we shouldn't." She wasn't wrong. Because when Ryan was little, he was the most generous child I'd ever known. When he was 8 years old, he once gave his entire birthday money to a classmate whose house had burned down. I still remember how proud I was of him that day. But life changes people, especially when they begin measuring success by appearances instead of character. After I hung up with Dorothy, I finally started the car. As I drove home, my phone buzzed again. "Ryan," I answered this time. His voice came through immediately. "Mom, finally, where have you been?" "In a meeting," I said calmly. "Well, this is ridiculous," he snapped. "The hotel manager is threatening to cancel the suite. Lauren is furious. You need to fix this now." There was that word again, need, as if I were still responsible for solving every financial problem that appeared in his life. "Ryan," I said quietly, "have you spoken with the hotel manager?" "Yes, her name is Claudia something." "Claudia Alvarez," I said. There was a pause. "How do you know that?" "Because she called me this morning." Another pause. "What did she say?" "She confirmed the bill." Ryan exhaled sharply. "Good, then you understand the situation." "Oh, I understand it very well." My voice must have sounded different because Ryan suddenly grew quieter. "Mom, what's going on?" For a moment I didn't answer. Then I asked a question instead. "Ryan, how much do you think you and Lauren have spent from the family trust this year?" Silence. Then he said carefully, "I don't know exactly. Try, maybe 30 or 40,000. I almost smiled. 200,000. The silence on the line stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally Ryan said, "That's impossible." "No," I replied, "it's documented. That can't be right." "It is." Ryan sounded suddenly uneasy. "Mom, Lauren said the account had discretionary funds available." "It does. And she said you approved the requests." That sentence landed exactly where I expected it would. So now we were finally approaching the truth. "I didn't approve anything," I said. Ryan's voice tightened. "What do you mean?" "I mean someone used my credentials to approve those transactions." For the first time since the conversation began, Ryan sounded genuinely shocked. "What? Yes, that's ridiculous. It's also illegal." Another long silence followed. Then Ryan spoke slowly. "Mom, are you accusing Lauren of something?" "I'm stating facts," I said calmly. Marcus Doyle at the bank traced one of the authorization requests to a device connected to Lauren's email account. Ryan inhaled sharply. "That doesn't make sense." "Then perhaps you should ask her about it." His voice dropped lower. "Mom, listen, we're in the hotel lobby right now. Lauren is right here." I heard faint voices in the background, then Lauren's voice cut through the phone. "Evelyn?" She sounded irritated, not worried. "Yes," I replied. "This entire situation is extremely embarrassing," she said sharply. "We are standing in a 5-star hotel being treated like criminals." I remained calm. "Lauren, have you been submitting financial requests through my trust account?" Her answer came quickly. "Ryan told me it was family money." "That wasn't my question." There was a brief pause. "I submitted requests through the portal," she admitted, "but the system required authorization. So if it went through, that means you approved it." "That's where you're mistaken." Ryan spoke again. "Mom, can you just send the money so we can deal with the rest later?" And there it was, the real problem, not the trust. Not the impersonated credentials, not the legal implications, just the $12,000 hotel bill. I took a deep breath before answering. "No," Lauren scoffed loudly. "Unbelievable." Ryan sounded frustrated now. Mom, this isn't the time for some kind of lesson. You're right, I said quietly. This isn't a lesson. Then what is it? It's the consequence of your decisions. The line went completely silent. Then Lauren said something under her breath that I couldn't quite hear. Ryan spoke again, his voice tense. What happens now? I looked at the road ahead as I drove toward my house. Now, I said calmly, you and Lauren need to leave the hotel. And then we're going to have a conversation about everything. Ryan hesitated. What kind of conversation? The kind that involves my lawyer. His voice changed instantly. Lawyer, yes. Mom, this is getting blown way out of proportion. Is it? Yes, it's just money. No, I said quietly. It stopped being just money the moment someone tried to impersonate my authorization credentials. Ryan didn't respond. Finally, he asked one last question. Mom, are you really going to make this a legal issue? I thought about that for a moment. Then I answered honestly. That depends on what I discover next. I ended the call and pulled into my driveway. The roses in the garden were glowing in the afternoon sunlight just like they had that morning. But something had shifted inside me. For years, I believed protecting my son meant fixing his mistakes. Now I was beginning to understand something very different. Sometimes protecting someone means letting them face the truth of their own actions. But what Ryan and Lauren didn't know yet was that the financial records Thomas was reviewing weren't the only evidence being collected. Because later that evening, Marcus Doyle was going to send me the digital authorization logs. And those logs would show exactly who submitted the requests and when. And once I saw those timestamps, I would realize something even more disturbing about what had really been happening inside my own family. That evening, just after sunset, I was sitting at my kitchen table when my phone buzzed again. The screen showed a name I had been expecting all afternoon. Marcus Doyle. I answered immediately. Good evening, Marcus. His voice sounded more serious than it had earlier. Evelyn, I've got the authorization logs. I leaned back in my chair and glanced toward the window. Outside, the sky was turning a deep shade of orange above the rose garden. And, I asked, Marcus exhaled slowly, you were right to ask for them. What did you find? There was a pause on the line. Then he said quietly, every authorization request tied to your credentials came from the same device. Lauren's, yes. That part didn't surprise me, but Marcus wasn't finished. But there's something else you should see. My instincts sharpened immediately. Go on. The timestamps. Now that word made my attention sharpen even more. In my old profession, timestamps were everything. They told the story people tried to hide. Marcus continued. The requests weren't random. They were submitted late at night almost every time. How late? I asked. Between midnight and 2 in the morning. I stared down at the kitchen table. Midnight, 2 in the morning, that was interesting because Ryan had always been a morning person. Even as a child, he woke up early meetings. Early workouts, early flights for work events. Lauren, however, had a completely different schedule. Her social media life revolved around late-night posting, editing photos, responding to comments from followers around the world. Marcus continued explaining. The system also recorded the device ID tied to those submissions. And it matches a laptop registered under Lauren's business email. I nodded slowly. So the pattern is clear, very clear, Marcus said, but there's one more thing you need to understand. What's that? One of the requests wasn't just approved using your credentials. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? Marcus lowered his voice. It was submitted from your home network. That sentence landed differently. My home network? Yes. For the first time all day, I felt something shift inside my chest. Because suddenly this situation was no longer just about Ryan and Lauren overspending money. This meant something else entirely. Someone had used my own internet connection to submit a request under my credentials. Marcus, I said slowly, what date was that request? I heard him typing on his keyboard. Let me check. It was submitted 4 months ago, April 17th. 1:38 a.m. I stood up from my chair. April 17th. That date meant something? I walked slowly toward the living room window, thinking. Then suddenly I remembered. That was the weekend Ryan and Lauren had stayed at my house. They had come to visit for 2 days after attending a wedding event in the city. At the time, I had been happy to see them. We had dinner together, talked about Ryan's business. Lauren showed me photos from her latest trip to Miami, nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. But sometime after midnight, while I was asleep upstairs, someone had used my internet connection. Marcus spoke again. "Evelyn, are you still there?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm just thinking," because now the picture was becoming much clearer. And it wasn't just Lauren's behavior that concerned me, it was the timeline. Someone had sat inside my house, logged into the trust system, used my credentials, and submitted a financial authorization request. I returned to the kitchen table. "Marcus," I asked calmly, "do the logs show what device accessed the system that night?" "Yes." "What was it?" "A laptop." "Lauren's, most likely." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Marcus." He hesitated before hanging up. "Evelyn, I know this is difficult." I smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised what 35 years of auditing prepares you for." After we ended the call, I sat quietly for a few minutes. Not angry, not upset, just thinking, because now the question wasn't whether Lauren had been manipulating the trust system. That much was obvious. The real question was something else entirely. Did Ryan know? The sound of my front gate opening pulled me out of my thoughts. I looked through the window. It was Mrs. Dorothy Lane walking across the lawn with a small basket of fresh tomatoes from her garden. She knocked lightly before stepping inside. "Evening, Evelyn," she said cheerfully. Then she saw my expression. "All right, what happened now?" I told her about the authorization logs, the timestamps, the laptop, the April visit. Dorothy listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set the basket on the table and folded her arms. "So your daughter-in-law sat in your house, used your internet, and approved spending your money?" "Yes." Dorothy shook her head slowly. "That takes nerve." I gave a small nod. "Or desperation." She studied me carefully. "What are you going to do?" That was the question everyone seemed to be asking me today. I walked toward the window and looked out at the roses again. Richard planted those roses 20 years ago. He always said roses required patience. You couldn't force them to bloom faster than they were meant to. People were very similar. Eventually, their real nature always surfaced. "Tomorrow morning," I said calmly, "I'm meeting with Thomas again." Dorothy raised an eyebrow. "And Ryan?" I turned back toward the table. "Ryan asked to come over tonight." "Are you going to let him?" I thought for a moment. Then I nodded. "Yes." Dorothy gave me a knowing look. "That should be an interesting conversation." I smiled slightly. "Very." But what Ryan didn't know yet was that the authorization logs Marcus had sent me contained one final detail that changed everything. A detail hidden in the system records. A detail that would answer the question I hadn't yet asked out loud. Because according to the timestamps, the night Lauren used my internet to access the trust system, someone else logged into the account just 6 minutes later. And that login belonged to Ryan. That evening, just after 7, the doorbell rang. I already knew who it was. When a person calls 8 times in one day, they usually don't wait very long before showing up in person. I opened the door and there stood Ryan Parker, my son. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be. The same brown eyes. The same slightly nervous way he shifted his weight when something serious was about to happen. But the man standing in front of me looked different tonight. Tired, worried, and for the first time in a long time unsure of himself. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Come in, Ryan." He stepped inside and looked around the house as if he hadn't noticed it properly in years. The same photographs were on the wall. The same wooden clock ticked softly above the fireplace. Nothing had changed, except the conversation we were about to have. I led him into the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee. Ryan sat down across from me at the table, running his hand through his hair. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "Lauren went back to the city," he said. "I see, she's not happy." "I imagine not." He let out a frustrated breath. "The hotel kicked us out this afternoon. That was expected." Ryan looked up sharply. "You knew that would happen?" "Yes." He stared at me as if trying to understand something that suddenly didn't make sense anymore. "Mom, what is going on?" I folded my hands on the table calmly. "You remember what I did for a living, Ryan? You were an auditor." "A risk auditor," I corrected gently. "My job was to investigate financial behavior when something didn't add up." He shifted in his chair. "Okay, and over the past 8 months," I continued, "a great many things have not added up." Ryan's expression tightened. "Marcus called you?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. I figured he might. That answer surprised me slightly. You expected the bank to contact me? Well, he hesitated. I knew the trust account had some monitoring systems. That word was almost amusing. Ryan, I said quietly, how much do you think you and Lauren spent from the trust this year? He looked down at the table again. I told you earlier, maybe 40,000. I slid a printed document across the table. He picked it up and started reading. At first his face showed confusion, then disbelief, then something else entirely. 200,000? He whispered. Yes. That's not possible. It is. Ryan shook his head slowly. Lauren told me the funds were available. Did you ever check? No, she handled the requests. There it was again, the pattern. Responsibility quietly handed to someone else. I leaned back slightly. Ryan, do you remember the weekend you and Lauren stayed here in April? He frowned, thinking. Yeah, after the Henderson wedding. Do you remember what time you went to sleep that night? He shrugged. Late. Why? Because the trust system recorded a login at 1:38 a.m. from my internet network. Ryan's head snapped up. What? Someone used my credentials to authorize a withdrawal request? That's impossible. No, I said calmly. It's documented. Ryan looked genuinely confused now. That doesn't make sense. You would have been asleep. I was. And you didn't approve it? No. He stared at me for several seconds. Then he asked the question I had been waiting for. So who did? I slid another page across the table. This shows the device used for the request. Ryan read the line. His shoulders stiffened. Lauren's laptop? Yes. He leaned back slowly. She told me the approvals came from you. She was mistaken. Ryan rubbed his forehead with both hands. This is insane. But we weren't finished yet, because there was still one more detail in the authorization logs. I picked up the final page. There's something else you should see. He looked up. What? I placed the page in front of him. This is the system activity record from that same night. Ryan read silently. Then he froze. His eyes moved back to the timestamp again and again, because the document showed something very specific. 1:38 a.m. Authorization request submitted. 1:44 a.m. Secondary login from Ryan Parker account. Ryan's voice dropped almost to a whisper. That's my login. Yes. But I didn't approve anything. I didn't say you did. He looked at me desperately now. Mom, I swear I didn't submit that request. I studied his face carefully. One of the things you learn after decades of investigations is how to read people when they're under pressure. Ryan looked scared, confused, but not deceptive. Tell me what happened that night, I said. He thought for a moment. Lauren was working on her laptop late, he said slowly. She said she needed to send some business emails. And you? I woke up to get water. I remember seeing her at the kitchen table. Did you use your phone? He nodded. Yeah, I checked my email for a minute. That explains the second login, I said quietly. Ryan stared at the document again. So she used your credentials, and then your login appeared minutes later, I finished. His face went pale. Mom, are you saying Lauren set this up? I'm saying the digital records tell a very clear story. Ryan pushed the chair back slightly, standing up. This can't be real. Sit down, I said gently. He did. Ryan, I continued, people reveal their character when money is involved. He looked up slowly. That's the thing you always say. Yes. And what does this reveal? I watched him carefully before answering. That depends on how honest you're willing to be about everything that's happened. Ryan looked down again. For a long time he didn't speak. Finally he whispered something I didn't expect. Mom, I think Lauren has been lying to me. The words hung in the air between us. Because in that moment something important had changed. For the first time since this entire situation began, Ryan was no longer defending the story he had been told. He was questioning it. But what neither of us realized yet was that Lauren Parker had already begun telling her own version of the story. And the next morning, I would discover exactly how far she was willing to go to protect the life she had built on someone else's money. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. That wasn't unusual for me. After 40 years of working in financial risk and compliance, my body had developed a habit of waking up early long before most people even thought about starting their day. But that morning felt different because the phone call at 4 a.m. had changed something. I walked slowly into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. The house was quiet, the way I liked it. Outside the window, the sky was beginning to turn a pale shade of blue as the sun prepared to rise. For a long moment, I simply sat there and thought about the night before. My son, Ryan Parker, calling in a panic. His voice tense, almost desperate. "Mom, the hotel says your card was declined." Then the number, $12,000. And finally the demand. "Send it right now." But instead of arguing, instead of explaining, instead of trying to fix the situation like I had done so many times before, I had simply said one word. "No," and then I hung up. That single word had surprised him, but what he didn't understand was that my answer hadn't been impulsive. It had been building quietly for months, maybe even years. Because when you spend your entire career analyzing financial behavior, you start noticing patterns most people ignore. And Ryan and his wife Lauren Parker had developed a very predictable pattern. Spend first, call later. Ask mom to fix it. At 7:30 that morning, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus Doyle, the bank compliance officer who had called me 2 days earlier. Marcus had been a colleague of mine years ago, back when I still worked in corporate auditing. "Good morning, Evelyn," he said. "Morning, Marcus. I thought you should know we completed the review of the trust activity. And there were no new attempts after last night." That confirmed something I had already suspected. Lauren had pushed too far, and when people push too far financially, they usually stop only after they realize someone is watching. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. Before we ended the call, he added something else. "One more thing, Evelyn. Yes, the hotel manager called the bank this morning." That caught my attention. "The manager? Yes, Claudia Alvarez from the Grand Meridian Hotel." I recognized the name immediately. That was the same luxury hotel where Ryan and Lauren had checked in 3 days earlier. "What did she say?" I asked. Marcus cleared his throat. "She wanted to confirm something about the declined authorization. And she said your daughter-in-law insisted the account holder had already agreed to cover the bill." I almost smiled. Lauren had always been very confident when speaking to other people. Confidence can be useful in life. But when confidence is built on false assumptions, it becomes something else entirely. Marcus continued. "When the bank told her the account holder declined the charge, she sounded surprised." I nodded slowly. "Yes, I imagine she did." After the call ended, I finished my coffee and walked out onto my back porch. The roses in the garden were blooming again. My husband used to say roses were the best teachers in the world. They reminded you that patience always wins in the end. At around 9 o'clock, my neighbor Mrs. Dorothy Lane walked across the yard carrying a small basket of fresh strawberries. Dorothy had lived across the street for 25 years. She knew my entire family history, whether I wanted her to or not. She set the basket down on the table and looked at me carefully. "You look calmer today." "I am. Did Ryan call again?" "Not yet." She raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual." "Yes," I said, "but it won't last." Dorothy crossed her arms and leaned against the railing. "You know what your problem has always been, Evelyn? I suspect you're about to tell me. You protect people too much." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I used to." "Used to?" "Yes, because something had changed the night before. For years, I had quietly covered Ryan's financial mistakes. A credit card payment here, a car loan there, a temporary loan that was never repaid. Each time I told myself the same story: he's young, he'll learn eventually. But people rarely learn lessons when someone else keeps solving their problems. At around 10 o'clock, my phone finally rang again. The name on the screen said Ryan Parker. I answered calmly. "Hello, Ryan." For a moment he didn't speak. Then he said something that surprised me. "Mom, I went to the hotel this morning. I see. I spoke with the manager, Claudia Alvarez." "Yes, you know her." "No, but I know people who spoke to her." There was a long pause on the line. Then Ryan said quietly, "She showed me the bill. And it wasn't just the room." Of course it wasn't. Luxury hotels rarely produce simple bills. "Private spa services," he continued. "Champagne, restaurant reservations. Designer shopping through the concierge." Another pause. "Lauren charged everything to the room." I leaned back in my chair. "That sounds like Lauren," Ryan sighed. "She told me you had approved it." "Yes." I suspected she might say that. His voice sounded tired now. "Mom, I'm starting to realize something." "What's that?" "I've been blaming the wrong person." For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he asked the question that mattered most. Can we talk later today? Yes, I said. Just you? Yes. After I ended the call, Dorothy looked at me curiously. Well, he's coming over, she nodded slowly. Good. Then she picked up the basket of strawberries and placed it firmly in my hands. Just remember something, she said. What? Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the same mistake. I looked out across the garden again. The sun was higher now, lighting the entire yard in warm gold. For most of my life, I believed being a good mother meant always saying yes, always helping, always fixing things. But at 68 years old, I had finally learned something different. Sometimes the most powerful thing a parent can say is the one word that teaches a child responsibility, the one word that protects your peace, the one word that forces the truth to finally come out. And that night at 4 in the morning, when my son demanded $12,000, that was the word I chose. No. And strangely enough, that single word may have been the most loving thing I had said to him in years.